Hi everyone, I am Rick Zanotti, and this is eLearnChat, where you always learn something new, or at least we hope you do. This is part 3 of our kind of tips and tricks on how to become a better writer, things to avoid or things to keep in mind. This particular show is going to be all about who, what, when, where, why, and how. Say that backwards. No.
I'll
Anyway,
try.
I am joined today by my good friend and co-host, Dr. Susan Nash. Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm great. Great to be here.
Appreciate it. And Susan, for those who don't know, she is, well, one, she's a professor. She's been working in the university systems for a long time. She's done many other kinds of jobs. She works for a large association. She's been a teacher, a writer. She's written all sorts of stuff. You name it, she's probably written the book, edited it, or corrected somebody else who wrote it. So she's got a lot of experience with writing. Let's get started. This show is sponsored by Talking Vids, corporate video, e-learning, enterprise-wide development, online interviews, multimedia development, and more. Visit us at www.talkingvids.com. And we are back, should be on our 2-shot. And Susan.
Well, that was a very generous interview or introduction. I feel embarrassed. But at any rate.
No, we could say more. And you've also been a podcaster for the last 12 to 14 years. We've been doing a lot
That
of
was
shows
one of
together.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's another.
but I like you were saying about the who, what, where, why, when of writing, and then how to get started. And you mentioned earlier, like, what do I think of when I think of that? And okay, audience members will probably relate to this if they're familiar. I think of Lloyd Bitzer and the Rhetorical Situation. It's a classic article, and in it, he talks about how to figure out how to do things with words, how to influence people to action, and get your point across and be persuasive. And he starts out with analyzing the rhetorical situation, which is to identify who your audience is, what their beliefs and values are, what it is that they know about what you want to do, what exactly you want to communicate, and what you want them to do. And then what are the tools that you'll need or the pieces of information you'll need to get them to do that?
And those are pretty key points in writing. I remember when I was in high school and then later in college in journalism. The first thing we learned in journalism writing was who, what, when, where, why, and how that applied to a story, whatever kind of story or whatever kind of article or editorial piece or whatever you were doing. Somehow, part of whatever you're doing will meet one of those. For example, who? Well, when I say who, what do you think of when you write? What is the who?
I think of the audience and audience analysis. At the same time, though, if you are talking about a profile about a person or a team or the people that you're reporting on, then I think of them too. And what is it that I need to provide back in terms of background for them to have credibility or gravitas?
Okay, and what does what mean to you?
That's a good point. Okay, what to me is usually the content or the main idea, the main subject. And what usually means different things to different audience members. So then you have to make sure that somewhere, without being too wordy, get in a definition section. Like define what are the constraints? What exactly do you mean by that term?
Now, how does what apply when you're writing, let's say, a novel?
I'm terrible at plotting, so what usually means little or nothing to me.
Okay.
But if I'm writing a technical article, then, for example, I just came back from Bakersfield, California, and we were talking about orphan, idle, abandoned, and marginal wells. So that what had to be defined for the audience. Like, in California, what is the difference between an idle well and an abandoned well? And it turned out that it's sort of a legal definition.
When? Well, how does when play into this picture?
When it matters if you have cause and effect or a time sequence of what it was before and now it is now you've got this. And then in that case, it needs to be very clear what any kind of timeline is, and also any kind of causal relationships.
So when is mostly time? Placement.
I would think so.
Placement.
Yes.
Where?
Okay, depending on a technical article, let's just say a technical article and just go back to the idea of the orphaned, abandoned, idle, marginal wells. Where they're located. So one of the topics was, how can we locate and find them? And then we had a person who came out with a drone and talked about the types of sensors they put on the drone and how they can detect the metal below the surface and up to like 10 or 20 feet. So that where became situational in terms of the actual activity, but then also in a bigger picture where it was in California, but then how is it different, say, in Colorado or Oklahoma? Are there things that will make the location unique?
Why?
That's the most important. And I think that we should start with why. And the reason we should start with why is that's our mission. And that, again, getting back to the rhetorical situation, why are we doing this? What is it that we want to accomplish? And then why would our audience care? And there's this concept of consubstantiality that's important to get established, which is getting under the skin or relating to your audience so that you understand exactly what their motives are, what their motivations are. So that's the why is personally what you're doing and why you're doing it, what you want to accomplish, but then also why would your audience be the least bit interested?
Right. How?
This is so much fun.
Our final word. How?
Again, it depends on what you're talking about. If we're talking about a rhetorical strategy, then we talk about how we present our data. Do we do it in the way that the audience will understand it through stories? If it's a general audience, do we tell the story first and connect, and that's our rhetorical strategy? Or do we have a highly technical audience that really needs this information so that they can design a research experiment or add it to their knowledge base and apply the information and knowledge to their own activities? Or in another how do things work together? How will doing this type of thing influence something else, whether it be public opinion or is it a process? So I think if we're talking about policy, public policy, how do we make it clear that what we're talking about will have a certain outcome?
Would you say that how is synonymous with method?
Yes, I would say.
That's good. She agreed. Actually, as a writer, you don't really think of that from the get-go right up at once. Sometimes you do, and I'm saying you as the general you. But there are times when, depending on what you're writing, all of these words do actually mean something or have to
That's
be
true.
considered before you start writing.
I'm going to jump in and let's go back to a two shot so we can see you.
Oops,
So you
sorry.
can't hide. Here we go.
Yep. And for example, you do a lot of creative writing. What's your approach when you write creatively? Or let's say you're writing a soft skill type course. How does that differ from other kinds of writing that you may write?
Well, a soft skills course, I try to be creative, and I think of quirky and whimsical scenarios or scenarios that are likely to happen that the audience can relate to. Now, if it's creative in the sense of really being creative, it depends on what I'd like to do. And I remember having seminars where we explored the different techniques that people used in the past, primarily postmodernist, to literally try not to make sense, to try to put together some sort of verbal equivalent of abstract expressionism and just see exactly how the mind attempts to make meaning through free association or just a juxtaposition of little snippets and it's interesting to see, for example, in Spanish, Latin American writers, a lot of the post-boom writers did that. And you think, why am I reading this? This is just all random, jumbled flashbacks and scenes and all that. And William Faulkner was good at that too. And people at first hated it. And then they started to realize it's really personal. It's almost like going through my own mind and experience. And it's sort of liberating and fun.
That's interesting. And of course, you brought up the other thing. If you're writing for different cultural styles, it's totally different. Depending where you are, what country, continent almost, the writing styles are extremely different. If you're talking to a new writer, somebody, let's say you're talking to an instructional designer, what advice would you give them before they write something?
Well, I'd say, first of all, if it's an instructional designer and you're having something that's going to have an assessment at the end, I would say, first of all, make sure that you know what your overall course objective is or the module objective, and then you have your learning objectives, and then make sure that your content aligns with that objective in the right type of level. So, for example, if it's a technical term and it's identify, make sure that you have a definition somewhere in your slides, your slide deck. And then when it comes to your assessment, then if it's identify, you can often do multiple choice, and those are appropriate for identify types of learning assessments or assessments. So I just say, think about your learning objectives.
That's true. Actually, it's really funny because a lot of times instructional designers, when they start writing, whether it's scripts for a video or scripts for e-learning, they create a lot of characters and then they never show them again. And it's like, huh? What happened to that character? So they get lost in some of their own details. I've seen that with quite a few writers who they try to start a grandiose thing and then they get lost in it. And it's real interesting, especially when you're on a live video shoot. I've been in some of those where the writer is in the video shoot with us, not knowing what happened in the video shoot. Not knowing what's supposed to happen. Makes for an unhappy director. And so, anyway, well, no, I appreciate that. That was real good, and it's things to consider when you are writing, and the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Keep that in mind always. You may not use every single one of those or at the same time or moment, but they can make a big difference to what you're doing. Susan, again, appreciate having you on, and we will see you next week for another show. Thanks, everyone in the audience. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.